and refreshments. We're going to head into our discussion now, if I can get this microphone loose. So I know at my table there was a couple of folks with questions, so I'll start over here and put them on the spot because I'm mean like that.
Hi, my name is Lucia, and I have a quick question. One of the things I was wondering about is how do you know when an offender is sort of at the right point in their, I don't know if it's adjustment or in their desire to make amends? Like, how can you, what characteristic needs to be present in the offender to be open to be able to take advantage of the program? Is it time? Is it characteristic? Is it?
I think it's a combination of all of them. And I know that there are people in the program who are ready to do it. Like, they're very open to it, and you can see it right away. But the other thing is, even if someone is not quite there, I find that the information that's given to them and the exercises that they're given to do can sometimes make the difference, so that it opens the door for them to go, oh, that's sort of that aha thing, right? And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. Like, I know in the States this program is mandated. And I don't know. I'm not sure that's the best thing. But in our institution, a lot of what happens is that parole officers will say, okay, you do not qualify for any programming, CSE programming, so go take the victim impact. And so I get that. And some of them, so it's just within them. And sometimes, like I said, you don't know, even until afterwards, right? But it's an openness to walk through it and take the journey and take the information in and look at themselves. Yep.
I know there was a question about domestic violence over here.
Hi. Domestic violence perpetrators are notorious for not accepting accountability. Even though they might say they are willing and open, they tend to blame others. How do you get around changing their mindset so that they are not blaming their victims, number one, and also the fact that they are so familiar with their victims that they can manipulate it, can manipulate the situation very, very easily. I think this program is awesome, I really do, but I do have concerns about their ability to manipulate.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. I actually just did the domestic violence on International Women's Day. I did the session on domestic violence. What it tends to do in the room is people get very quiet, and so, you know, I can only tell by what they offer back to me or what they will write, that kind of thing, and it's within them, right? The only thing I can do that I know that I'm doing is providing them with the information that they need to have, and that I'm also giving them the opportunity to see what it looks like from a victim's perspective. And if they're open to it, yeah, but sometimes they're not. It's very true, sometimes they're not. And I don't work magic. It's just, they can't make the decision if they don't have the information. They can't go a different direction if they're in there and they don't have any other way of looking at it. So to me, I'm giving them the best shot that they've got to be able to make some kind of a change in their life. Do they? I don't know.
Have you seen any positive changes in particular? Because that's my field of interest is.
I certainly see people who have recognized themselves in it and have been able to sit down and talk to me about it. Where it goes once they're out, I don't know. I don't have a way of following that unless somebody keeps in touch and tells me how they're doing. But I have had people that seeing it in front of them like that has said to them, it made them recognize themselves, and they wanted to talk about it. And that's, yeah.
If I can just add to that, I think the part where accountability comes into play is something that you observe and look at throughout the process. So that same person you're supposed to, well, I think anyways, you should see growth. You should be seeing more insights, more information being sort of understood. And the facilitator is able to see whether or not somebody is either stuck somewhere. And this is a voluntary process as well, right? So the person might get to that point where they're done, right? And it really is up to the facilitator to have that conversation to see whether or not they continue or if this is not fit for them, right? So there's always that option. Not somebody can't just go under, the radar and just.
And sometimes it comes sideways. Like when she's talking about that, you do the accountability sort of foundation, and then there's all these different offenses that you talk about. And you can get somebody who's in there for a particular offense who will, through being able to look at it from a bit of a distance, the kind of effect that it has with another offense, to start to see some things. And then hopefully that when they get to the point where they're at their own offense, that they can take that. Because there is a thread that goes all the way through it. No matter what the offense is, these are the things that people suffer from afterwards if they're a victim. So it's a kind of a combination, and you're hoping that at the end the person has some insight into it, right?
And this is the last part of my question, because it's a long question. Once I get the mic, I just can't help myself. And this one is for Rick. You're obviously extremely committed to the process, absolutely, and I see that. During groups, are there men who actually will challenge each other? For example, if, say, a domestic violence offender talks about how he just can't wait to get home because he wants to smack his wife, are there men who are actually who are into the program who will actually challenge him and say, why would you want to do that? This is your family. Can you just answer that?
There's some interaction between guys in the group. You would never have a guy say that openly in the group that he will reoffend. He may say after the program what a pile of crap that was, and depending on where he's at, there are some guys who will say, wait a minute, no, it wasn't. This is what I heard. Didn't you hear that? You'll get that more afterwards, not during. But there are guys that do speak up in the middle. Every group is different, with the 15 guys, you have a lot of different dynamics. So you have some where there's really lots of discussion back and forth and maybe challenging some ideas, and then some of the other groups, it's like trying to pull teeth out of a horse to get somebody to say anything. But I do know guys that will challenge people outside of the group afterwards, to say, like if they'll say, what a pile of crap that is. Because some guys that, as Susan said, have to be there because their PO wants them to go, they don't really get it. They may have that kind of comment afterwards, but there are some guys that will challenge them on that. The domestic violence session, I think it's the longest session. It's like 40 slides, and it does give all the information, the cycles and the makeup and how it all works and the manipulation and everything. So it's given a lot of information there. They may not get it that moment, but that seed's planted in there, through that session anyways.
Thanks. Anybody else with a burning? Oh, good.
Hi, my name's Kelsey. I just had a question. I was actually just going to kind of go off from that. So you're talking about how there's a lot of information on domestic violence, especially with the slides. Is there any concern, perhaps, that an offender would use that information to further manipulate, especially since you do discuss the cycles of violence, especially the makeup and the cycles, especially the makeup stage as well?
Yeah. As offenders, before the light bulb goes off, we're very manipulative to start with. Crime's very self-centered activity, and it's very manipulative. It's trying to understand that. I mean, when they told me I was a very manipulative individual 30 years ago, I didn't believe that. But I can certainly see that today from participating in enough stuff. So sometimes you get information and yeah, you can figure out how to use that to your advantage. Say the right thing at this moment and say the right thing at that moment, and it's all in here. It's not down in here. But that's true with, you know, any session for any offense. You know, the thing is that the people that facilitate it long enough, or the people that work with us guys long enough, and board members and whatnot, most of them have been around long enough, they can see the sincerity versus the manipulation, you know. But I guess, you know, that door's always there a little bit.
And when you do see the manipulation that's happening, is there anything that you would specifically do in order to put a stop to that or help them turn the light on?
I do myself with some guys, some of the guys I live with that say some foolish stuff, you know. Some days I challenge them on that. Some days I just, I can't. I've been there a long time and I get tired. But there are, you know, there are a number of guys there's, you know, that are involved, as I am, in restorative justice activities and making amends and being, you know, walking in, talking the same thing, not just talking it. And, you know, we do challenge each other, and we do challenge other guys in our little circle, or when we're sitting like in the lifers group or in a Bible study or in a class of this, you know, there is some challenge in that goes on. Sometimes with guys you've been there with for 20 years, you kind of just shake your head and say, I wish I could get to him, but I can't, you know.
Thank you very much.
The other piece I would say from my perspective is that if there's somebody that you feel like is there's an issue or there's things that are coming up that you're uncomfortable with, I have no problem communicating with case management. So, you know, I would have a conversation with the parole officer about what's going on. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. My question is about, you had mentioned doing some screening for trauma amongst the participants in your group. And I'm just wondering if you have a sense of how many of the men participating have experienced childhood trauma. And part of the reason for my question is because now I also work in the violence against women field. There's a lot of difficulty for parents accessing counseling for their children, because particularly in the court system, in the family court system, if the child is having access to both mom and dad, because it's seen as being in their best interest, counseling is often not safe for them, because the abusive parent is, you know, maybe trying to manipulate it. What are you telling them, or what are they telling you, or whatever. So if they can't access counseling for some of the violence they've witnessed, is it then leading potentially into criminality later on? And you're seeing them in your group now.
That's a big question, but
Yeah.
I think I can tell you from what I observed when we did the training, a lot of the chaplains that were there made that point, that many of the inmates that were part of their group identified having childhood traumas. Now, if it necessarily leads to criminality, I think that those are researchers would probably help you with that. But when it comes to identifying whether or not it is in the group, the relationship with the chaplain then becomes really important, because a lot of the times the chaplains, from what I saw in the training, they already knew before they've even signed up for the program. They already know where there might be some issues, where there might be more support needed. Yeah, I think I'm trying to see if I really answered your question there, because it was a very long-winded comment. But.
I mean, I'm just thinking that some of those answers, I mean, if you have a bit of a sense of how much childhood trauma there may have been, that could also potentially influence funding for counseling for children.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Yeah.
This is kind of in response to your question. I'm privileged to work with young offenders. I meet them in facilities and follow them into the community. Often, I mean, they've perpetrated crimes against other people, often violent, but a wide range of crimes. And it's anecdotal, what I'm saying, but my experience working with them is all the guys I'm working with, for the most part, have been done to. So they've had crimes perpetrated, either systemic crimes that I would view as crimes, multiple placements, like loss issues, loss after loss of community, loss of this. So yeah, I think most of them have, it's anecdotal, but I'd say 70 to 80% of the guys I work with
Oh, yeah,
have
a
had
huge percentage. yeah.
really significant trauma. And it's important, I think, to get to that and acknowledge that. In particular, the systemic trauma.
Yeah.
So poverty, oppression, racism, you can go on and on, sometimes all at once, learning disabilities that aren't attended to. So yeah, I think it's a huge, huge end of things to attend to. All that said, some people live through all of that and never commit a crime against someone. So, but we're all different, right? We're all
Yes.
unique individuals, and we all react to what we react to in different ways. So yeah, I love that end of it. I love the idea that you guys are attending to empathy, because I think that's what makes us all operate, right? If we can be empathetic to each other, it makes the world better, right? So, the one thing I want to ask a question: your program, or some of the programming, seems to depend on literacy, and I'm sure you have other things other than someone who's literate. A lot of the guys I'm working with wouldn't be able to write journals, at least in a way that they'd be able to express themselves. A lot of them have bad mental health issues, so it's a messy soup, to deal with. And sometimes programs don't attend to that very well. They're wonderful starting points, though, I think, to educate, to get out there. So that's more or less just a comment, and if you want to reply, so.
Well, one of the things that we do when someone identifies, and we do have literacy issues all the time, is that we will often partner people together, and they can do things together and work on it. Like if I can, I will do it myself. Sit down with somebody and go through the things. But it comes at them in multiple ways. Some of it is, sure, we're doing this scenario, and you're going to write a response, and what are the questions and stuff. But there's a lot of it that's visual, that it's DVDs of people telling their stories. There's interaction. So it's not undoable, and if they've got a bit of support, either from me or from a friend that's also taking the course, that's willing to sit with them and talk through stuff with them, and we can work it that way, we're quite aware. And this curriculum, they've revised the curriculum, and it's been put so that it's now basically at a grade 5 level, so that it's accessible to a lot of people.
And there's a lot of
There's an awareness.
exercises,
Yeah.
you can have also victims coming in as speakers as well, videos, as she said. Just to go back to that piece of the trauma and addressing those issues, we had that discussion during our training as well, where we acknowledged that many of these inmates have trauma and that trauma might keep them from actually being open to listening to somebody else's trauma without having. So a lot of the chaplains decided to include a self-care chapter in the curriculum as well, to take that time to address some of those issues. Of course, the point isn't to treat trauma, to not give chaplains that task of treating trauma, but just to have them have enough information to be able to refer them if needed, and take that time to do those reflections with the individuals in the group.
Anyone else have a comment or question?
Hi. So my question is about, I guess primarily for you, Susan, maybe for the rest of you as well to comment on, but I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around the effectiveness of the concept of, have you thought of your victim today? Because I guess what I'm sort of trying to wrap my head around is, how do we get people to sort of think about themselves in a new light and sort of think of themselves as not an offender or this or that, but at the same time not minimizing that they indeed did do some egregious things or whatever. We certainly don't condone that, but I wonder if you can see different reactions to that, or if that blocks some people, or if that actually really does propel people into that healing and that awareness. I'm not sure if I'm being clear. I'm kind of rambling, but okay.
This is something new this time around that I'm trying, and it was something that was suggested by Nicole. She puts that up. So I talked with my expert about it, and he thought that that might be a good idea to put that up there. So I'm trying it. I haven't got a huge reaction to it. To me, it's just a background thing that says, this is kind of what we're here about. This is the focus. And that's when I was talking earlier about people who try and pull it off track. And some of them are doing it purposefully because they don't want to deal with stuff, right? So it's just, it's there. It's not like I'm not pounding my fist on it each time. It's just a reminder that that's why we're there. We're thinking about it. And the course is, yes, very much future oriented too. Like it is about healing of the guys of, you know, where do we go from here? How do you make amends? And not being stuck in that, because I don't want them stuck in the guilt, because that happens to people. And if you get stuck there, you don't go anywhere else. So there's a difference between feeling guilty and feeling remorse for what you've done, and being able to move and move ahead, right? So that's an interesting perspective, though. I like that.
You can think of your victim every day without beating yourself up. You can think of them every day and still be positive. You can think of them every day in terms of, you know, what am I doing so this never happens again, and what am I, living amends kind of thing. And, you know, and you can just hold them in a good light every day. It's not always about seeing that sign up there, have you thought about them today, in a punishing manner. Many of us spent 20 years doing all of that, and it's kind of there to remind you to think of them, but to move beyond that, thinking about them in a negative fashion as opposed to a positive thing.
And a person can be working on several things in their lives to become better, right? So the accountability part is, this program addresses that part where you look at the victim and the impact it has had on that person. There are other programs and other approaches that come and address other areas that you need as well to be able to reintegrate society well. So it's just to keep that in mind, that this isn't the answer to everything, but this program is focused on the victim's needs. And another thing too, it's beneficial for this program is beneficial for victims as well, because it allows them to have a voice in this whole justice system, right? It allows their perspective to be shared. This curriculum was designed by victims advocates and victims as well, and the stories that are shared as well are from them directly. So this is a way for them to be involved and participate in the healing.
Cindy and Susan, I hope it's okay if I jump in there and respond as well.
Hi, Kara.
Hi, my name's Kara, and I have the role of community chaplain in Kingston, and did the same training, and I'm facilitating the course at Collins Bay Minimum Institution. So we did week 5 last night, which means we're quite a ways behind Susan, and this task of putting this on the whiteboard every week weighs on me. I have not found a comfortable place to do it yet, and I've experimented with trying to change the way I write the question. And last night I said, what do you think about the question on the whiteboard? Like, where is that going, and how do you think it's being received? And the person that I'm teaching with said, I don't know, shall we leave it off? And we debated, and I said, let's leave it off and ask them. So we did our 5 minutes of self-care meditation at the beginning, the way we always start. And then I jumped right in and said, I'm just wondering if anybody's noticing anything in the immediate environment. And I was kind of like, the whiteboard.
Right here.
And somebody put their hand up right away and said the question, have you thought of your victim today, is not there. And I said, yeah, you're right, you got it. And I, was very forthright and explained. We had this little conversation about what it means to have that there. And, I kind of opened it up for any comment. There was no comment. And I don't know what we'll do next week. I'm thinking, one thing that occurred to me today driving up here was maybe we can invite people to write it on themselves, and then see what happens with that. So I hear you. I feel like there's a heaviness to it, and I understand it. So I appreciate the question.
When we gave the training, Nicole, who gave the training, made sure that everybody in the room understood that what she was bringing to the table was a curriculum. This was material that could be used, and because you are the facilitator, because you are the person who is the most well placed to give this training, you know the people that are participating, you can modify this curriculum, this program, to where you do feel comfortable teaching it, and that might mean making a few changes to it, but she's providing the core of the material. So a lot of the people shared that they were much more comfortable with that, just because every single person there had their own approach to things.
Hi, I actually just have a different question, and this is kind of building off of the last one as well. You're talking about how the program can be used, and this is also building a bit off of what Rick said before when he was talking to us about how the program impacted him. And it was how you teach empathy. And Rick, you were saying that you wouldn't reoffend because of what you know now, and compared to what you knew back then. How do you feel the program could be used outside of prisons more as a prevention program, especially with at-risk youth? When I worked with children, I know instead of doing punishments, I would spend a few minutes sitting them down and discussing how they thought their actions made the other person or the group feel, especially when I was at the daycare. And I found that actually really helped impact a lot of problem behavior. And in the next few months, a lot of that went down. Do you think that you could apply this same program in the same way to at-risk youth? And if you did apply this program as a prevention, what changes would you make?
I've often thought a bit myself that this program maybe should be taught before people offend. Should be taught in schools or in group homes or because it may stop some offending. I don't know. You'd have to change some of it. I mean, I'd have to think about it for a while because a lot of it is referring to having it already been done, the thinking that went behind and the cycles and all this different thing that isn't really needed. What's needed is the impact, the consequences, a lot more cognitive stuff would have to be in there to think about what you're thinking, and how offending would affect this person and this and this. I mean, one could be put together for that group of people beforehand, and it would make a lot of sense to have it before crime is committed. When you talk about empathy and remorse, I mean, I never heard of those things prior to being 30 years old. They just weren't around where I was growing up. They weren't around in my peers or anything. It was just very self-centered, all about me, all about us behavior. Had we heard about that in the group homes, maybe it might have made a difference. I was talking with Lucinda afterwards, and one of the things I said is, when I came to prison and started hearing things for the first time in my life, I really had a thirst for knowledge and to learn all this stuff because there were so many things I'd never heard about. And, it goes to some of what you were saying. Loss after loss, placement after placement. So one group home to another group home to, the streets to, there isn't a lot of opportunity there for learning. There isn't a lot of opportunity there to learn about compassion, to learn to be empathetic. you know, but I think it's something that really should be out there and should be taught. How we quite put a program together for that, I don't know, but I do believe it's possible. I'd be interested in working on it.
Anybody else? Comments, questions for the panelists? Rick, I know when I came into prison to see you guys, to see some of the men as part of the Victims Advisory Committee, we went in to meet with a group of you who had been through the program. For me, what I noticed was that there seemed to be a lot of change when the offender realized the harm they'd done to their own family. When they really took that on, then they were, in my opinion anyways, then that seemed to open the door to what they had done to their victims and the victim's family. And have you observed that? Is that something that you guys have noticed in facilitating?
Yeah, it's something I've noticed with talking to a lot of other guys. Their first awareness is to the harm they've done to their own family, because they don't believe they hurt their family. One of the guys that I spoke to before coming up here about this, he said to me, like, his sister used to tell him, you know, I can't go to school anymore because of what you did. I can't get a job anymore because of what you did. And he couldn't understand that. He didn't get it. Why would that have any effect on her? And it wasn't until after doing the program and reading Shannon Mahoney's book, Through the Glass, that, wow, okay, now I understand how it hurt my family. And that opens the door enough that now he can see, okay, now I can see the depth that it did to my victim and their family and all the harm and everything done there. Sometimes the first impact is with their own family and their own selves first. It was for me when I realized it affected my children and they were being harmed because of what I did, and I never ever thought of that. But that's what first opened the door.
Perhaps Susan can also, that just made me think of this exercise that sometimes they do in the program, where Kay Johnson explained where she had somebody from the victim side and somebody from the offender side, and she would make the other participants name victims of.
Yeah, it's one of the first things you do when you're talking about accountability, and you try to get people to understand how, you know, okay, so here I am, I'm the victim, and who else would be a victim? And by the time you get done with it, you know, you say, okay, now you stand in, you're that person, there's nobody left sitting, because there's so many people that are affected by the one act. And that's one of the first things you talk about in the accountability, and that's the secondary victim thing. But what Rick said is quite true, that is often the door that opens, that lets somebody see, because it's their, you know, if it's their family, it's someone that's close to them that they love, that sometimes is the place where they get to see what it means to other people as well. Yeah.
I have Mike again.
Okay.
Just a commentary again. Like, I sometimes get frustrated when we all get together to talk about giving individuals responsibility, and I think we need to give individuals responsibility for their actions and what they do, and they need to learn about it, they need to learn empathy. But every time I start working with the people I work with, I go back to the systemic things, and it's tough to learn empathy when I was going to say something foul, but I won't. I swear a lot, so I won't. There's chaplains in the audience, and I don't want to swear.
Oh.
So
No, I never hear anything like that at work.
You've had a positive impact on me already. I've gained empathy for you. But when someone's hungry, when their dignity is sapped from them, and not all offenders have this happen, but a lot that I work with do, when that's happened to them all growing up, it's a tough gig to get empathy.
Yeah.
Really, when everything's done to you, so my frustration is change is often talked about at the individual level, but we just ignore the society's responsibility for education systems that don't work for everybody, for putting labels on people that stick with them, and then we switch the labels, then we medicate the person. For child welfare systems that are trying, all these systems I think are trying to do their best, by the way. I screw people over with my interventions too, right? But we don't ever look at the systemic things, and we keep slamming away at individuals to change, and we need to do that, but what do we do about all the other stuff? We just don't, I think, cast enough light on it, or
But we do in the coursework here acknowledge this, especially when we're talking, like one of the sessions is on child abuse, right? And in that, I mean, one of the things that I will say is when a child is hungry, when a child is experiencing abuse at home, what happens to them? That's where all their energy is going. They're trying to figure out how to survive that. So if a school system or anybody else doesn't acknowledge that, you're absolutely right. Like they're put more and more at risk the more things that pile on them like that. And then what do you do with that? What do you do to cope with that? Well, you either act out aggressively, or you harm yourself, or you do whatever you do. But absolutely, like you're.
As a society, we have a royal commission eventually when someone dies or gets hurt, and then we ignore the
Yeah. Putting that responsibility on individuals. I mean, and we do talk about community a lot too. Like, and the piece on domestic violence, a lot of that was around, the community needs to do a hell of a lot better job with recognizing that as the issue that it is, and doing something about it, and supporting women, and helping to keep them safe. And it just doesn't happen. I mean, I gave them the articles about the 3 women that were stalked and killed in Renfrew County. That was part of what we looked at with domestic violence, right? So, I hear you.
Kelsey, you're so frisky today.
So many questions. It's a good topic. I actually just wanted to make a comment on that. So the idea of teaching empathy to someone who may have struggled with some systemic difficulties throughout their life can actually be very similar to how you teach men privilege, especially men who are marginalized, who may have grown up poor, and teaching them to understand what privilege is and how it does impact them in different ways. So I feel like that could actually be very similar, and it's something that you can actually add in order to build up and in order to teach empathy. So it's just something to think about. I don't know if that's something that you guys do as well as part of the program.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so I don't know what you mean when you're saying you're teaching privilege. So just kind of.
A lot of people don't know what privilege is
Right.
in society, and so part of teaching it is part of explaining what it is, how it works, however each person is impacted by their social status.
Sort of boundary kind of things you're talking about too?
Yeah, so almost the boundaries. And it can be very difficult because a lot of people do get very angry, they feel a lot of shame, they feel a lot of guilt, and so there's a lot of emotional reactions that can come out of it.
Right.
And so when you are explaining what privilege is to someone, you have to be very aware that you don't know what their background is either. And so you're teaching them in a sense to understand where their social status is, but also to understand, how they could be marginalizing others. And that's one of the reasons it's very difficult to teach privilege to a white male who is also marginalized in a certain way, because oftentimes they say, well, what about me? And it's true. And you have to kind of look at that aspect of it as well. So when you are teaching empathy to someone who has gone through a lot in their life, you have to be very aware of that as well. And so I just kind of noticed that there's a lot of parallels with both of those ideas.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. No, that's great. Lots of good comments. Anybody else? Susan?
Okay, so my other question was about, you said there were chaplains and a couple of volunteers.
Yes.
I think there are maybe concerns about the use of volunteers. Careful kind of balance between, like, I come from like the sort of COSA world, which is really sort of trained, screened, all of that volunteers, which works to some degree, but we sort of do that in tandem with real professional therapy at the ROH or whatever, right? So in terms of the volunteers that are involved in facilitating, I just wonder, I guess, who they are And yeah, if there is a fine line between you can volunteer and be in this role, or it's not safe because maybe you don't have those relationships established in that trusting relationship.
I think the volunteers that we had at our training were already volunteers that were already involved in activities and helping the chaplain already in that institution. So there was already involvement there.
And I mean, one that I'm thinking of in particular in her professional life is a teacher, so that she has a lot of skills that she brings with her, but she's also, so you're never going to do this with somebody who is not a long-term volunteer that you know inside out, right? And it's still, you know, a place where you have to make judgments about it, because, yeah, it could be disastrous. Yeah.
Anyone else? I think we've had a great session, questions and answers. One of the, just quickly, one last thing I just thought of, relating to public safety. I know kind of the question that brought us here today was, is this beneficial to our communities? Just thinking about inside the prison itself, in that community, are these programs beneficial? Does it reduce fighting among inmates? Does it reduce tensions with staff? Is it helpful even in that prison setting?
I would say yes. I'm in a minimum, so the minimum experience would be different than if you were doing it at a medium or a max, right? And whether or not it would be as helpful, somebody asked that question about when people are ready for it, and that's something that has to be explored too, I think. But I see people who are in a group together like that travel that 6 weeks, that go through all that material together, changes their relationship with each other. They become a kind of community. And then there are others that have done it too, and I know that there's a lot of discussion around it after they leave the classroom. So I would say that it's positive. They're good discussions about the kind of things that are going on in that classroom. So yeah, but yes.
Yeah, I would say that it would reduce the fighting, the violence, because as Susan said, that group of guys, they form a little bond in that. And one or two of those guys have guys that were in the other one that have formed their little bond kind of thing. So it does spread around more. It does give guys cause to think, you know, of the consequence of, rather than just, let's go and knock this guy's head off, or that. You think a little more because you've just been exposed to thinking of consequences and repercussions and all that stuff. But it's more, it builds a little camaraderie between all of the groups, so there would be less tension between them guys. They'd be more open for discussion of the problem rather than just trying to solve all your problems physically.
Great. Well, I think that's going to bring us close to the end here. We're about 11:45. I want to thank you all for coming so much and participating today, and Rick and Susan especially for coming from Kingston here to share with us about the important work you're doing with this program. And Cindy, you guys too at CCJC and all the work that you're doing to get chaplains trained. We think it's really important, and hopefully will slowly grow in the prison systems across Canada. I look forward to reporting back to Public Safety about the event today, and that all of you are here and interested in this topic, and hopefully to push it forward a little bit more to those powers that be here in Ottawa. So maybe you can join me in thanking our speakers again, and thanks again for coming, and I'll help you with validating your parking at the back. Thank you.